Hello everyone, today we have a big theme around methane. Today we're going to focus about where we see the methane emission around the globe. And we have with us carbonmapper Mackenzie Huffman, Director of Strategy and Impact, and Dan Cusworth, Director of Science. You know a lot about where to find the emissions and what to do with it. Can you explain for the viewers what carbonmapper, the work you do?
So carbonmapper, we're a nonprofit that is really focused on detecting, pinpointing, and quantifying methane super emitters around the globe. And to do that, we use remote sensing technologies from aircraft and satellites. We analyze the data from those tools and then put it out publicly on our public data portal that is accessible to anyone. And then we work with stakeholders and decision makers like governments, civil society, and industry to use the data to drive action on methane emissions.
And what do you mean with super emitters? Can you explain to the viewers what the difference from super emitter and, I don't know, normal emitter?
Yeah, I'll hand it to Dan.
Yeah, exactly. So as you know, we don't have a huge amount of time to reduce global concentrations of greenhouse gases, methane and CO2. So we're really looking for the solutions that can be acted on quickly. And so as you can imagine, greenhouse gas emissions come from a variety of sources, especially in the methane sector: oil and gas, waste, coal, agriculture. And there's kind of two varieties of methane emissions. One is small diffusive sources that make up a lot of emissions, but there's also this other class of methane emissions that are called super emitters. And it can be quite a small fraction of infrastructure, maybe 1%, 0.5% of all of the infrastructure in an oil and gas basin, maybe in this super emitting mode. So when you say super emitting mode, just really large emissions relative to everything else, it can be a small fraction. But those emitters, because they're so large, make up a really large component of emissions within a basin. And this occurs globally across multiple oil and gas basins. And so again, as we're trying to get to near-term solutions for cutting emissions, there's this real opportunity to go after the small fraction of emitters that are really high relative to the rest of emissions in a basin. The real challenge to this, though, is finding out where those emission sources exist. And this is why we need things like satellite technology, because we have global access. We can make measurements globally. Every oil and gas basin. We can identify where those hotspots are. We can geolocate them within tens of meters. And by doing that, it makes it an actionable data product, especially when we connect that to the person on the ground who can really fix it. We can find the leaks, they can fix it once we get into the hand of the right people.
This is very impressive. And as I understood, you have just recently launched your own satellites to do this.
Yeah, so carbonmapper, we've used a diversity of measurements through the years: airborne instruments, satellite instruments that agencies like NASA have created as well. But last year we worked with our commercial partner Planet Labs to launch a satellite called Tanager. And this was really a breakthrough satellite because it allowed us to be able to see super emitters down to about 100 kilograms an hour, which is a really good detection limit. And it allowed us to do down to like 30 meters spatial resolution, and it gave us global access. And so Tanager has been up for about a year, and we have found a huge amount of mitigation already. Found a number of methane super emitting plumes globally, but we've also had multiple instances where we were able to give that data to people on the ground who were engaged, who understood what satellite data looked like, and were able to mitigate methane emission sources. And so it's really our plan to continue to grow this with the satellites we have, and ultimately to get more data to be able to expand this into the future.
And when you find those big emissions, what do you do with the data? Maybe you...
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we put all the data out publicly on our public data portal about 30 days after observation. And so we work with a lot of stakeholders to help them use the data for a variety of use cases. So one is using it for direct mitigation, so finding and fixing leaks, and that's governments, industry, and others. But we can also use it to think about things like informing policy. So where are there really big opportunities to use policy to drive the reduction of methane emissions? emissions and super emitters, but also thinking about, what are the trends over time? What are we seeing here? And then finally, methane has a lot of public health implications. So it's often co-emitted with air toxics. So if you reduce methane, you can actually help support community health. And so really we work with different governments and stakeholders and civil society and industry to drive forward action across all of those different use cases.
And when you find, is it often that suddenly it's a new leak and it's coming a lot of emissions that you see from the sky, but the company responsible maybe don't even know about themselves?
Yeah, so I would say, there is a really huge opportunity with the data that we found and some of the previous airborne studies that have been done that kind of led to the satellite launch and development, which was about half of what we see is not known, in part because they're not monitoring those areas at the cadence and the frequency that you need to find these super emitting events. And so bringing that visibility and transparency to these emissions is actually helping to do a few things. One, finding events that were previously unknown. And we've actually seen this with some of the differences between what's reported and what we are measuring directly, but also just really helping to support finding and fixing these large events and helping to prioritize investments. So a lot of companies, instead of having to necessarily do another survey of a whole infrastructure, they can really focus on where some of these really highly persistent super emitting events are occurring and focus on reducing those methane emissions.
So you actively look the source up and kind of call them over phone, or how does it work when you kind of get in contact with them?
Yeah, so I think in some instances we do, call folks up and we say, hey, and really try to work collaboratively to say, hey, we've seen something. So that includes state or government regulators, that includes operators. But then there's also the other avenue of trying to think about what are some of the pathways where we can think about programs at the government level or with collaborations with industry to actually drive more pathways for getting this data into the hands of those who can use it. So actually this week, a really exciting initiative was announced alongside our partners at Clean Air Task Force and the government of Brazil to use satellite data to focus on reducing waste methane emissions. And so really trying to help support capacity building and reductions at the same time by trying to build some of those processes to use the data and get it to some of the localities and the municipalities that could really do something with it.
So it's not only oil and gas, it's also waste.
Yeah, waste, coal, and then we can see like manure management in agriculture.
Here, yesterday, we had a show together with the Gold Standard. They are now looking into to introduce methane offsets verification. Can you work with them to show the proof that the emissions are not there anymore?
Yeah, so actually that is we didn't mention this earlier, but like one of the amazing things about satellites is that finding and fixing, you can also verify when it's gone. And so that's actually a huge success story for us, for the world, for the operators. And I think there's a lot of potential for using this data and that verification for some of the carbon credit markets. I think there's still a lot to be done in figuring out how these tools can actually support within the frameworks for carbon credits and things like that. But it definitely is a really promising avenue for using that verification aspect of satellites.
And if I understand correctly, all your data is public domain.
That's right. So something that's really important for us as a nonprofit that has a public good mission and to really hit on our mission of making data actionable and transparent is providing that data to the public as a public good. And so we make all of our data available on our public data portal so that folks can see it, they can understand it, they can use it to prompt mitigation. And so something that we encourage everybody to do is to go to our website, data.carbonmapper.org. Look around, see what the distribution is of methane super emitters in your neighborhood or in regions that you're really interested in. See what that looks like. And we really encourage all to understand that, internalize that, and help us on this journey of making the data actionable, of motivating policies, of motivating operators, or if you're an operator, using the data yourself to motivate your mitigation efforts. And so transparency is fundamental to us to making this work.
I think it's really fantastic, your solution. And what do you need from others? Is it funding, partners, policymakers embracing this? What are you doing here at COP and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, I would say a big thing is raising awareness, one of the data and the tool and the use of satellites in this way. I would say another one is we are always looking for building collaborations and partnerships. So one of the big barriers to satellite data and this data in general is just the capacity to use it. And there's a lot of implications there for especially governments that are early in their methane journey and stakeholders. And so doing a lot of work to help them understand what is the data, how can they use it, building those collaborations. And then always we're a nonprofit, and so thinking about how can we get resources to grow that impact globally, because this is a global issue, and really thinking about how can you build that network of partnership takes time and resources and capacity.
I think it's a fantastic solution, and we're running out of time for this interview, but I hope I will be able to talk to you more. Because what you do is so important to get rid of the methane, and for you at We Don't Have Time that have been following the Buy More Time campaign, if we stop the emission of methane, we can actually cool the planet with up to 0.5 degrees. So this is so needed solution to identify where we have the emissions so we can stop them. I have a last question to you. Maybe it's the most tricky one, I don't know. Your organization is called carbonmapper, but we're talking about methane here, not carbon.
So that's our CEO often says we actually can see both carbon molecules. So we do have some CO2 capability. Dan can speak much more to that, but we do see CO2, but it's really, really large CO2 emissions, primarily from like electricity generation, but we do have the capability to observe more than just methane.
So maybe something for the tech development to pivot to. Thank you so much.